After the battles of Concord and Lexington, it became clear that something needed to happen in the colony's relationship with Britain itself, and particularly with Parliament. So, a Second Continental Congress was called and met in Philadelphia in 1775 to discuss the very things that they would have in mind. At that Second Continental Congress, you had some conflicting and differing opinions about what course of action the colony should take. Quite a number were fervently in favor of an independence movement, recognizing that we are our own entity, we are different from our colonial oppressor, we deserve to be different. There were others in the Continental Congress who believed that, well, whereas we are different, we don't necessarily want to take the course of action towards independence. Maybe we should take a more conciliatory route with Parliament and just kind of go from there and mend fences, if you will, from that point forward. So they didn't quite know what they were fighting for. Were they fighting for independence? Were they fighting for their rights as a colony? Were they fighting for various other different reasons based upon regional aspirations? So that became a pretty big question for the colonists. And it was at that Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, where all of these questions came to light. It became obvious that if there was going to be a conflict, it was going to be very costly. Okay? You don't have as much money in circulation. We'll talk about that here in just a second. Other things that kind of galvanized the American spirit, if you will, was that the British military really began ramping up their operations in North America. They actively recruited Native Americans to fight on the British side and actively told stories about how if this new colony becomes its own country, you're going to suffer. Better to suffer with us, the enemy that you know, rather than the one you don't know, right? They also tried to recruit slaves all throughout the colonies and promised freedom to the ones whose masters remained loyal to Britain. For those who fought on revolutionary ideological sides, they would remain enslaved. Okay? And then, of course, you have German mercenaries, Haitians, who were recruited by the British to fight in North America. The Haitians would become incredibly angering towards the American people. Okay? That would be a very big, angry point of contention for American colonists in that regard. Okay? And it was deemed, though, that by Lord Dunmore's proclamation that Parliament had the right to block all seaports in America, and basically they would reject various different conciliatory acts from the American colonies. Okay, there's kind of your answer right there. Furthermore, we talked about this at the end of last chapter, but in circulation around this time was Thomas Paine's Common Sense. And again, Thomas Paine was from Britain, and he came to the United States in 1774, and within 2 years, by January of 1776, he had written a widely circulated publication called Common Sense. And it basically laid out how British North American colonies were different than Britain themselves. Yes, they were British subjects, but it laid out how they were different. It also laid out various different grievances that sided with the colonists. Hey, you are subjugating them, enforcing taxation upon them and all kinds of other oppressive acts, and you don't even give them any sort of say. They're rightfully angry. And Common Sense was circulated throughout Europe and especially gained fire in the colonies. That goes to show the power of the print press, partially and thanks to Ben Franklin. But otherwise, though, it was also circulated in English rather than French or Latin. So more people could obviously read it. So people back home in England or people in British North America could read it, and, well, there you go. You have an actual Briton himself galvanizing the cause for American independence. So some things would have to happen. Um, as 1775 rolled into 1776, you would continuously have congressional meetings in Philadelphia, where you had representatives from all colonies at that time discuss their grievances. It became obvious that while they weren't on the same page, they all had a common enemy. Okay? So, some things would need to happen. Even though the odds were stacked against the colonies in a conflict against Britain, even though there was not money, even though they weren't on the same page, they were on the same page enough to recognize their own. And in the meantime, in the summer of 1776, the Congress determined we want to take the course of action to declare independence. Enter in our friend Thomas Jefferson, okay? One of the founding fathers. And Thomas Jefferson had a large role in writing the world's greatest breakup letter. It's also known as the Declaration of Independence. I call it the world's greatest breakup letter because it's basically in 3 different sections, determines basically what this letter is, what it declares, why, and then what will happen from this point forward. Okay? So, Thomas Jefferson had help from Benjamin Franklin. It's all about the Benjamins and all the hundreds. Okay? We talked about Benjamin Franklin a few videos ago, my favorite founding father. Thomas Jefferson basically wrote out about why things were going to happen. But first, in the actual Declaration of Independence itself, he lays out what? The very first section of the Declaration of Independence declares that the United States shall be independent from Britain. It's declaring itself its own sovereign nation, the United States of America. Okay? And with that, with the Declaration of Independence, it would launch a period of political innovation. Things are going to happen once America has its own country. Okay? It declares itself independent from all nations, and it declares itself its own nation. Okay? The second section lays out grievances. There's a tyrannical King George, an unruly parliament. But at that point, the focus is more on George. Parliament has more rule of power than King George at that time. So, you want to kind of make it more about King George than Parliament. As upset as they are, you don't want to give them any more reason to kind of stick it to you just that much further. So make it more about the tyrannical king who's overstepping. Okay? And given that the guy is pretty unstable and insecure, you can make a case that, yeah, it's all about King George, right? So if you're trying to convince Parliament that it's not as much about them as it is against the king, you've got kind of a case because the king is pretty nutty. Okay. And the third section basically draws boundaries. So therefore, here's what Britain is going to do. At no point will Britain have any sort of authority in the United States of America. You're going to remove all your troops. You're not going to have any sort of authority. If you try and tax us, haha, good luck. No, we're our own country. You have no authority whatsoever in America, in the United States of America, that is. Okay? So, from that standpoint, Thomas Jefferson lays it all out on the line. And on July the 4th, 1776, Congress approved the Declaration itself. So it wasn't written on July the 4th. It was approved on July the 4th. That is why the United States celebrates July the 4th as our Independence Day. July the 4th, 1776 is when Congress approved Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. Therefore, that is the day we founded our nation. That's why we celebrate July the 4th. So all the fireworks you see and all the parades and all the stuff that goes on that day, all the barbecues and the day off, America! That's us. That's the reason why. So The justification for this resolution was laid out, the boundaries, the reasons why, the world's greatest breakup letter, the Declaration of Independence, baby. America. Yeah. Okay. So that document had support, and it had various different theories that harkened back on prior English theorians, rather, like John Locke. Okay, so one of the foundations of the document, and I'll read it straight from here. Jefferson wanted all Americans to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Okay, that was written into the Declaration of Independence. He was basically declaring this new sovereign nation as free from tyranny, and that everyone will have the right to a new life where you could have social mobility. If you start from nothing, you can improve your life. You can move on to something else, unless you're a slave or a woman. But I'm serious. But otherwise, though, if you were a white male, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, consider this. We live in the 21st century. It is important not to view this document from a 21st century 2020 lens. Consider it from a 1776 lens. We must not be guilty of presentism where we're reviewing historical value from today's modern lens. Back then, yes, slaves were not deemed as full people. They were not free. Women did not have any sort of right to vote, and oftentimes they did not have rights to own property, especially in the former British system under mercantilism. So, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness at that time pretty much extended to white men. Okay? We know now that should extend truly to everybody. So if we are to have true American exceptionalism and freedom of opportunity for all, we must work to correct some of the injustices and help to uplift and provide equal opportunity. Okay? Equal opportunity, though, does not always mean equal outcome. But that being said, if you level the playing field truly and have thoughtful conversation about being fair and right for all, black people, Hispanic people, women, LGBTQ+, everybody, if we all have the same opportunities, then it's all fair. Then the outcomes, if they are different, that's a whole nother story. Okay? But otherwise, though, you have this great breakup letter. Okay, now what? Oh boy, Britain's going to get this and they're going to be pissed. Oh boy, they're going to be pissed when they get this. Okay? We better start to get some troops together because we kind of sent this thing out and we didn't really have a whole lot of mobilization or organization. We don't really have a formal military. Yeah, we just poked the bear, the world's biggest military, and we just basically slapped them in the face when they weren't looking. Now what happens? Okay, Congress decides, you know what? We kind of need to build the military. So yeah, there was some revolutionary fervor among people in the colonies after Lexington and Concord. That kind of died off. And it became obvious that something was going to need to happen. First and foremost, if you're going to build a military presence, you need to have some sort of military expertise. Well, in the colonies, you do have a number of folks who had experience fighting in the French and Indian War. Most notably, George Washington. Yeah, remember Fort Necessity from the 7 Years' War? The very first battle, the French and Indian War, Fort Necessity, when they tried to attack Fort Duquesne. Okay? Yeah, that's him. George Washington, the former British military officer, supported America's war for independence. And he was selected to command all American patriot troops. If you fight for the American cause, you are an American patriot. Okay? George Washington would be the face of America's military movement in our war for independence. And there are various other different things that you will see that would be led under his guidance and his partnerships and his expertise and his struggles to help us win that war for independence. But otherwise, you've got to have somebody strong who's got political clout, military training clout, and somebody who could maybe help get financing for the war effort. But overall, we poke the bear after the breakup letter gets sent out, and we'll see what happens. Side note, speaking of breakup letters, if you have ever been in a relationship where you tried to break up with someone and things went foul, or things became angry on the other side, maybe talk about it. Talk about some things, or maybe think to yourself about a time where you tried to break up with somebody and they're like, oh no, you can't do that. And they got really upset, like an angry boyfriend or a psycho ex-girlfriend or something like that. Just talk about what that experience might have been like and how you eventually overcame it. Okay? Otherwise, though, America has started an official independence movement. Now let's talk about a war.